Hello and welcome back to the Import Export Hub channel, everybody. Bogdan here, your host for the next couple of minutes. Thanks for joining in. And guys, without asking you to hit those small buttons below this video, let's dive into today's topic, in which I will cover the imports and the exports of Kenya, which is home to some 50 million people, is a leading economy in the sub-Saharan Africa, but also very important hub for East Africa in terms of financial, commercial, or logistics activities. Even though, let's face it, it has a lot to catch up, but if you ask me, the prospects are very, very good for Kenya in the coming years. And guys, with this short introduction about Kenya, let's crack the numbers here, and I will start with the overall exports. And as we can see here, Chapter 9 drives Kenya's exports with some $1.73 billion worth of exports for 2022. It was followed by Chapter 6, and then on the third spot we have Chapter 27, so mineral fuels and oils, with almost $451 million. And this top 10 list ends with Chapter 61 here, so articles of apparel and clothing accessories knitted or crocheted with some $174.3 million, which is 11% more relative to 2021. Now, in terms of cumulative value, these top 10 chapters make up for some 63% in Kenya's overall exports, and I wouldn't consider it concentrated if there wasn't for Chapter 9, who has almost a quarter in terms of weight, which is quite concentrated. But anyways, now in terms of year-on-year dynamics, we have 9.6% growth, or $648.7 million in absolute terms, with good figures coming from Chapter 9 and 27. While on the opposite side, we have big attractions concerning Chapters 6 and 7, some $111 million fewer exports for the former, and almost $87 million for the latter. So basically, these were Kenya's overall exports, and now I will move to the import flow, again the overall one, and here the values are much higher, and we see that in 2022 the overall imports amounted to some $21.1 billion, which is 9.5% higher than in the previous year, so 2021, with chapters 27, 84, and 72 as the performers, if you want, which were followed in this top 10 list by chapters like, I don't know, 10, 39, and it finishes with chapter 48, so paper and paperboard, with some $489 million worth of imports. Now, relative to 2021, we have an overall increase of the imports close to $1.84 billion, steadily increasing if we look at the last 5 years time frame. And overall, we have a compound annual growth rate of 3.98%, which could have been bigger if it wasn't for the 2020 contraction. Now, in what concerns the year-on-year dynamics, we have Chapter 27, who basically registered the largest increase, both in absolute and relative terms, while on the opposite side, we have Chapter 87, who had the largest absolute negative change of roughly $320 million. And now the last thing that I want to cover here is the balance of trade, which overall, as you can see here, is negative for 2022, some $13.7 billion, which, guys, is understandable as the developing economies need a lot of inputs in order to create their manufacturing bases. And if we're factoring out Chapter 27 here, which is, I don't know, $5.1 billion, we would arrive at some $8 billion negative balance of trade, which is not bad at all. Anyways, with both flows being covered, allow me to move to the top 5 chapters from each flow in order to see also the trading partners for Kenya and of course some of the main drivers. And I will start with performer from the export flow, which is chapter 9, and here we're seeing quite a resilient chapter, even though is commodity linked. And except for the 2019 contraction, we have positive figures culminating with 2022, who saw a 17% increase in exports, or some $260 million, thanks to the good figures coming from traditional partners like Pakistan or Egypt, both increasing their imports with impressive figures, some $68 million for the former and almost $38 million for the latter. And if I look closely here, there are only two partners in this top 10 list who had contractions, so the United Kingdom and the Russian Federation. But overall, we're speaking about, I don't know, $7-8 million, which is not making a dent really in the overall performance of this chapter. But sorry, this doesn't mean that you don't have to analyze what drove those contractions, especially if we're talking about the United Kingdom, Kenya's third largest export destination, and of course a traditional partner. As for the main drivers, well, we have heading 0902, so tea towards Egypt, and then we have coffee heading 0901 towards Germany. Jumping now to Kenya's second export driver for 2022, we have here chapter 6. We're talking about live trees and other plants, where the year-on-year changes were negative overall, some $111 million fewer exports, with the Netherlands, United Kingdom, and Saudi Arabia as the main partners, which were followed by others like, I don't know, Germany, Australia, or the Russian Federation. This last one with some $10.4 million worth of imports from Kenya from this particular chapter. As we can see here, we have some positive figures coming from Saudi Arabia, Kazakhstan, and Australia as well. But unfortunately, these figures weren't enough to offset the ones coming from the Netherlands or the United Kingdom. Thus, we have this big absolute negative change. You could argue that 2021 was an atypical year, and my belief is the same. And basically, Kenya's exports from this chapter, if you want, are a regression to the mean and could stabilize around $650 million. Now, in terms of the main drivers, I don't know if you are aware or not, but for quite some years, Kenya became the leading supplier of cut flowers for Europe. And as you can see, the main drivers are confirming just that. As for both the Netherlands and Norway, we have heading 0603, so cut flowers and flower buds. Moving now, guys, to Kenya's third export driver for 2022. We have here chapter 27. Not that interesting, as we're talking about commodity supply chains. And here the added value that I could bring is close to zero. Sorry. But I will do my job and pass really quickly through this chapter. And basically, we have some $450.8 million worth of exports with the Netherlands, the United Arab Emirates, and also Uganda as the main partners, which were followed in this top 10 list by others like, I don't know, the United States, Qatar, and ends here with China, with some $7.3 million worth of exports. As you can see, also the exports are quite volatile. It's understandable, as we are talking about a commodity chain with 17% increase in 2019. Then we have a 10 and 31% contraction in 2020 and 2021 respectively. Then it bounces back up with some 61% in 2022. As for the main drivers, well, petroleum oil, so heading 2710 drove Kenya's exports in 2022, both towards Uganda and Qatar. Moving now to the fourth export driver for Kenya, we have here chapter 26, ores, slag, and ash, with some $336 million worth of exports, which is almost 30% more than in 2021. With China here, the United States, and Spain as the main partners, followed by others like, I don't know, Malaysia, South Korea, or Singapore here. This last one with some $1.9 million worth of imports from Kenya in 2022. China clearly dominates, and it steadily increased its imports from Kenya, at least in the last 5 years. And overall, the compound annual growth rate for these last 5 years sits at almost 21%. The United States also moved quite aggressively in 2022, and it had the largest absolute positive change, some $67 million. And for me, at least, it will be very interesting to follow up if this trend will continue in the coming years, as the United States and China will clearly battle on Kenya's ores. And speaking of ores, we see that heading to 614, so titanium ores and concentrates drove the exports towards China, while niobium, hold on, tantalum, vanadium, or zirconium drove most of the exports towards Spain. Moving now, guys, to the fifth and last chapter that I will cover from the export flow. We have here chapter 15, animal, vegetable, or microbial fats and oils, with some $310 million worth of exports, which is 43% higher than in the previous year, with Uganda, Rwanda, and Tanzania as the main partners, which were followed by others like, I don't know, South Sudan or Mexico. And the top 10 list ends with Italy here with almost $8 million. The compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years is positive, some 22% overall. And the good news is that all the top 10 partners registered positive changes. And if we exclude Tanzania here, the same would have hold true on a year-on-year basis, where we see a 43% positive change, which translated into some $93.6 million, thanks to the good figures coming from its two main and traditional partners. As for the main drivers from this chapter, well, guys, we have margarine, so heading 1517 towards Tanzania, and heading 1515 fixed vegetable or microbial fats and oils towards Mexico, including here jojoba oil, whether or not refined. And with this last chapter from the export flow being covered, I will now move to the import flow, where chapter 27 was the main driver, with some $5.59 billion worth of imports, some 60% more than in 2021, with the United Arab Emirates here, Saudi Arabia, and Oman as the main partners, which were followed in this top 10 list by others like, I don't know, India, Kuwait, or Belgium, to name just a couple. On a year-on-year basis, this 60% increase translated into some $2.1 billion, with the United Arab Emirates contributing a lot, some $1.7 billion. And except the United States, the Netherlands, and Belgium also, who all had contractions, the rest of 7 had positive changes. While in terms of the main drivers, well, too boring here, really. But anyways, I will do my job. We have for both the United Arab Emirates and India the same headings. So petroleum oils, 2710. Moving now to Kenya's second import driver for 2022, we have here chapter 84, and we are talking about machinery and mechanical appliances with some $1.4 billion worth of imports, with China, India, and the US as the main partners, which were followed by others like, I don't know, Italy, the United Kingdom, or the Netherlands. This last one managing to export towards Kenya in 2022 some $20 million worth of goods from this particular chapter. Now, relative to the compound annual growth rate, again for the last 5 years, we have a negative 3%, while on a country basis, only China managed a positive growth in this top 10 list, some 2.5%. And if I narrow down the analysis on a year-on-year basis, things are not looking good, as we have some 11% contraction, which is almost $179 million in absolute terms, as the positive changes for, I don't know, Japan, Turkey, and the Netherlands didn't offset the negative figures coming from China or India. As for the main drivers, well, we have heading 8471, which drove most of China's exports, and then we have spark ignition, reciprocating, or rotary internal combustion piston engines driving the US exports from this chapter. Jumping now, guys, to Kenya's third import driver. We have here chapter 72, and we are talking about iron ore steel with some $1.2 billion worth of imports, which is almost 4% less than in 2021. And as we can see here, China, Japan, and India were Kenya's major partners, which were followed in this top 10 list by others like, I don't know, South Africa, the Russian Federation, or Uganda. This last one managing to export some $15.6 million worth of goods from this chapter in 2022 towards Kenya. In what concerns the year-on-year dynamics, we see that we have a negative change, some 3.6% in relative terms, and almost $46.5 million in absolute ones. And this negative change is not generated by the top partners, but by Taiwan and Ukraine, who decreased their exports in 2022 by 58 and almost $75 million respectively. And guys, as always, we have to consider the context here, and I'm talking about the conflict in Ukraine, which explains the export contraction for both Russia and Ukraine. As for Taiwan, well, here I think that it was mainly involved in trading, and basically in 2022 they were left out. Now, in terms of main drivers, I have here two examples, Japan and South Africa, and basically flat-rolled products of iron or non-alloy steel drove the exports for the former, and then we have semi-finished products of iron or non-alloy steel who drove the exports for the latter. Jumping to Kenya's fourth import driver for 2022, we have here chapter 10. Cereals, basically, with $1.2 billion worth of imports, with Argentina, Tanzania, and the Russian Federation as the main partners, which were followed in this top 10 list by others like, I don't know, Australia, India, or the US. This last one managing to export towards Kenya some $22.7 million worth of goods, just $125,000 more than in 2021. And it might be that this is just part of some aid program or some kind of contract. Otherwise, I can't explain this low variability. Anyways, now in terms of year-on-year changes, we see that the imports increased with some 16.3% or almost $169 million if I were to put the dollar figure to the percentage. And as we can see, we have only two countries in this top 10 list who experienced contractions, so Tanzania and Australia, while the rest had positive changes. The largest absolute positive change happening in relation to Argentina, who managed to increase its exports towards Kenya with almost $84.5 million relative to 2021. As you can see here also, we have some interesting dynamics. For your information, I've highlighted on each column the top 2 partners for each year, and I don't know if in 2018 and 2019 Russia and Pakistan were Kenya's main partners. In 2022 things changed, and these were replaced by Argentina and Tanzania. Anyways, moving to the main drivers, here I've managed to get my hands on 3 examples, and we have maize or cord coming from Tanzania, wheat coming from the Russian Federation, what else, and rice coming from Pakistan. And guys, with this being covered as well, I will now move to the 5th and last chapter that I will cover. Bear with me. And basically we have here chapter 15, animal or vegetable oil, and we have some $1.16 billion worth of imports for 2022, with Malaysia, Indonesia, and Cote d'Ivoire as the main partners, which were followed by others like, I know, Singapore, Thailand, or Egypt here. This last one managing to export towards Kenya some $4.3 million worth of goods. And overall, we see that we have a positive year-on-year dynamic, some $100 million more imports, with some interesting dynamics in what concerns the largest palm oil exporters. So I'm talking about Malaysia and Indonesia here. And if between 2018 and 2020, Indonesia was the largest partner for Kenya, beginning with 2021, things changed, and quite a lot. And Malaysia became Kenya's main partner, and basically in 2022, it managed to export almost $850 million worth of goods, mostly palm oil, as you can also see, which is almost, I don't know, 8 times more than Indonesia. And I don't know if this change had to do with some deteriorating relations between these 2 countries or something else. I can't explain it, and so I'm asking you guys, if somebody is familiar with this matter, please drop me a message and tell me what could explain this separation, if you want, between Kenya and Indonesia. And speaking, guys, of the main drivers earlier, let's cover also the main driver for Ukraine, which in 2022 was sunflower seed oil. So we are talking about heading 1512. And guys, with this being covered, that's it for today. Thank me by hitting those small buttons below this video. And as usual, until next time, keep your business safe. Thanks.